May 12th work session of the Billings City Council. Welcome back, members of the City Council. We were all together last night. The good news is we're not together tomorrow night. We hope, anyway, although some of us do have something to do tomorrow that we hope doesn't go into the evening, but you never know. All right, well, for any members of the public who are listening, you'll have an opportunity to comment at the end of item 1 and item 2 of our agenda. Item 1 are budget presentations. Our agenda is available on the city's website. Just go there and search for agenda and look for the May 12th agenda. And at the end of that first item, and also at the end of our second item, which is on public safety mill levy discussion. If you would like to comment, write down this number, 237-6196. So that's available when we open it up for public comment. Before we jump into item number 1A, Human Resources Budget Presentation, I'll ask our city administrator if he had any preliminary matters to introduce before we jump into item 1A. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just a reminder, if you, unless it's something absolutely critical to the moment, if you'd let each of the directors make it through their budget presentation and ask their questions at the end, you may get an answer before you ask the question. And that'll allow things to go a little smoother, but we're just going to move just as the agenda outlines for tonight. So thank you, Mayor. Okay,
thank you, Chris. If there aren't any other introductory questions or concerns or comments, we'll go ahead and move into item 1A. Carla Stanton, our Human Relations Director, it's all yours, Carla.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'd like to present to you the Human Resources, Health, Property and Liability Insurance budgets. Are you able to see it yet?
We are not seeing your shared screen. Yeah.
It's definitely there. Okay, here we go. And all right, I think we're ready.
Look at there, Carla. There it is, Carla.
Here we are. Okay, I'd like to share with you some of the statistics we have at the City of Billings. We have 940 full-time employees, 74% male and 26 female. We hired 278 employees in the summer to handle all the public works, parks, and rec. Our average age of our employees is 45 years of age. This is one place where you want to not be above the average. Unfortunately, I think most of us are. Anyway, the average length of service for a city employee is 11 years, and the turnover rate is actually the highest that I have seen in my 20 years. This past year, we turned 14% or 132 positions, and I think that is basically attributable at the time of a very low unemployment rate. So people, if they could find a job that paid them a little more, they jumped off and did that. So anyway, maybe something we need to continue to look at. I also wanted to show you what the average age is as it breaks down to our employee groups. And you can see that our fire is right at about 40 years old, 39.9. Our police is the youngest group right now at 38.16. Teamsters average about 46 years of age, and our non-bargaining group, which is where most of our supervisors land, is at 49.76, so nearly 50 years old. And we also have I also wanted to share basically the years of service by group. Sorry about that. And you can see there that it's about 11 years for fire, 14 for non-bargaining, 8 for police, and about 9 years for Teamsters. As you know, the HR, we wear many hats. I have 5 staff members. Jolene Yerger, she is our safety and risk officer, and she handles all of our property liability, workers' comp, our affirmative action plans. She deals with all of our random drug and alcohol testing, as well as our CDL and FTA alcohol testing programs. Lita Lantern, she handles all the benefits for the city. as well as health insurance, medical, dental vision. She handles all the voluntary benefits. And of course, right now with the and FMLA, and of course with the new programs, federal programs that came into play with COVID-19, she also handles the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act as well as the Emergency FMLA. And believe me, that has kept us very busy the last couple of weeks. Deanna Shirek, she is in our payroll. She's a payroll HR generalist. So she spends half of her time with the city's payroll analyst, Pete Byorth. And then she spends a lot of her time in interviews. She handles a lot of the interviews in the city, as well as she and I do a lot of employment investigations together. Pete Byorth is our payroll HR analyst. He handles all of the payroll, as well as the quarterly reporting for all of payroll, for the payroll federal recording, unemployment, workers' comp, those type of things. Val Ronquillo is our HR admin support specialist, and she's the individual who is the gatekeeper to the admin HR office. She handles all of our advertising, recruitment, prints off all the applications and determines if they meet mins or not, and passes those off to the other departments. And of course, we also do all of the collective bargaining at the city, as well as administering federal, state, local laws, workplace investigations, grievance arbitration, anything related to those type of services. Human resources budget is made up of mostly personal services. As you could expect, we have 69% in personal services and 31% in O&M. The total budget is $825,000. And of that, of course, 568 is personal services. The 5 largest accounts, line item expenses for HR are IT, charge for services, which is over $60,000. We have a time tracking software that, if you recall, you approved last year in the budget, where we will do all of our time entry, our timekeeping, much more automated, and that we hope to go live with the first part of September. Our management assistant program is $29,000. That is where all of the employee recognition, service awards, those type of things come from. Facility management, as you can, obviously that is the $24,000 goes to our maintenance of our facility at City Hall. And then the public information, management assistance program was actually the drug testing and all of that. And then public information was the recognition. And the other one that is tied really for the top 5 and 6 is advertising. And we did put more money into that for this, advertise some of our options on TV, because when we were in such a tight unemployment market, we needed to get our positions out further, and that's been fairly successful for us. Moving on to the health and dental plan. As you know, the city's health plan is self-funded, and as of January 1st, if you recall, last summer we did a request for proposal for our medical network, and in last summer, Rocky Mountain Healthcare and Rocky Mountain Health Network and Saint SCL Health were the successful providers. Anyway, so we continued that contract with them as of January 1st. And the health claims this year we project to increase at about a rate of 4%, which would account to $11.3 million. Dental claims will come in at around $650,000. Stop loss premium is which is really our reinsurance for our health plan. The city is on the hook for the first $235,000 of any participant's claim, and then anything over and above that is covered by our stop loss or our reinsurer. And the premium for that this year is projected at $791,000. And then our third-party administrator, of course, you're familiar with EBMS. They handle all of our claims, keep us in compliance with any laws relating to claims processing. And they handle all of our health savings account as well as our flexible spending account reimbursements. That is projected at $360,000. Let me catch up here. As you know, the city, because we are self-funded, we have a health insurance committee, and I think most of you are aware of that. It is made up of 15 members, 3 from each union, police, fire, and Teamsters, and 5 non-bargaining, and then we also have a retired member on that committee. This committee has been instrumental in I really believe in holding our costs down, and as well as the network contracting that we have. Since 2012, the city has only seen 1 increase in health insurance premiums, and that is, I would guess, unheard of almost in the country. We have 1 year we had a decrease actually, and then the one of the 8 years that we had an increase, it actually went up to 2 years to the rates that were there prior 2 years. So we've been very fortunate because we've been able to keep rates constant or stagnant, I guess. We have saved lots of money for the city as well as city employees and the taxpayers as well. Let me see. I want to tell you something else. Of course, we have the reserve level right now for the health insurance fund is well reserved. We are at $9 million. This has helped us maintain not having increases, and it has also helped us take on more risk with our reinsurance, our stop loss. So we were able to take on more risk and increase that deductible substantially in order to save premium in that stop loss. So I think that was a good decision made by the committee, and I think that will pay off for us down in the future. Currently, the health fund, just so you're aware, is running a deficit of $400,000, even though we are well reserved. That's why it's one of the budget items at the city. I think that's very hard to plan for because you just don't know what's going to happen with people's health, and who would have, 4 months ago predicted a pandemic. Fortunately, I think for us, we haven't been. It hasn't impacted us a whole bunch, but believe me, I'm happy to say we are well reserved just in case it does down the road. The next is a property and liability insurance program. The liability program is handled by MMIA, and actually, I want you to know that we were projected at 1.4. Of course, these projections were done a couple months ago, and we thought we were going to have a substantial increase. The good news is, right now, we can expect that to be about $300,000 less than what I have on my screen at 1.4. It'll come in closer to 1.1 million, and that change will be reflected in the final budget numbers. We are self-insured too for our liability. We have a $50,000 deductible. And then for our property program, that is the one that we're going to take the biggest hit to this year. When we met with our property provider about 6 weeks ago, they were anticipating up to 30% increases. Fortunately, it came in about 2 weeks ago at about a 20% increase, but we are really getting beat up right now because of our hail property claims. And so that's substantial. That is, definitely a large increase for property. And then, as you're aware, I think we are self-funded for all of our vehicles. And that has been maintained the same. We didn't have to project any increases in there. So basically, our property and liability program is run by Jolene Yerger, and she monitors all of the city's incidents and accidents, and she goes back to third-party carriers if they're responsible, if they're the responsible party, monitors all of the workers' comp and city safety program. And again, as I said earlier, the drug and alcohol. Some of the accomplishments that we've had in HR over this past year is obviously a big one was getting through the request for proposal for the medical provider network, and we are locked in for another 5-year deal on that contract. We participated in the Mayor's Challenge and achieved veteran ready status for suicide prevention. We added voluntary benefits, NCPERS Life, and what that is, it's a life insurance program that I think is very helpful to young families, or maybe they can't afford it. It tends to be maybe more expensive. This is very affordable coverage, and I really think the market for that is our younger families. We have other life insurance voluntary programs as well, but I think this one works best for the young families. Identity Guard is another program that we are offering, and it is a cybersecurity coverage for personal, for all of your personal devices. And then we have a Perks Connect program, and this is a company that goes and negotiates discounts nationally for your employees as well as locally, so that we started last September. We also increased the employee assistance program to 8 visits a year with our new contract, up from 6, and actually about 2 or 3 years ago it was 4 a year. So we're glad to have that. People, our employees do utilize that, and it's there for a good reason. And then we also moved vision insurance coverage eligibility is not covered by EBMS because it isn't self-funded, but we were able to get that. If you're familiar with our online enrollment, we were able to get it all online. So now you have a menu of services, and EBMS is willing to take that on. And even though we're not self-funded, they are helping us with the eligibility there. Some of the challenges that we face next year, or actually for fiscal year 21, The biggest, I think, is going to be collective bargaining agreements and the negotiations pending our financial situation at the city. This, I think, will be a big challenge. And I think the way to get through this is by meeting with them. I know Chris, Kevin, and I have done that already. And I think it's critical that we continue to meet and get Andy involved as we go to really sit down with their e-boards, you know, of those unions and the presidents and the vice presidents, and just have those discussions about, you know, what our numbers are going to look like, and develop, you know, even additional trust, because it may not look good, and if it doesn't, then I think we all need to step up to the plate and see where that lands. And I think they're willing to do that if we know and they know it's coming. And I think if we keep them in the loop and over the next 6 to 9 months, I think, you know, it'll be helpful. The other challenge, of course, is COVID-19. It has been extremely challenging for my staff to just get all the programs, and that, you know, came down as of April 1, get all that lined out and just continue monitoring that. And the biggest hit really was the school closures for our employees. If they didn't have family in town or somewhere for their kids to go, then they're the ones utilizing the program more than obviously the sick. We've been very fortunate at the city to not have any cases actually of any of our city employees. We've had many tested, but so far they've all been negative, so that's the good news. The other big project that we've been trying to take on for at least a year or two is digital imaging of all our personnel and medical records. And with City Hall being shut down for most of the time right now, with the exception of the 2 mornings, it has given Val more of an opportunity to try to get some of that done while she's in the office. She's in the office the whole time, but it has been helpful to without interruptions to get that done. The other one that I talked about earlier is electronic timekeeping implementation that we hope to have into effect by September 1st. And then again, recruitment and retention. It'll be interesting to see, you know, with the impact of COVID-19 and the unemployment rate as it is right now, and the number of people not employed, whether they're furloughed or if they're truly losing their jobs, whether that does change that for us. But right now, I mean, up to COVID, I think it's been a huge challenge for us, is the recruitment and the retention, just because the unemployment rate was so low across the state. Anyway, that's it. Do you have any questions, Chris?
Mayor, if I could, before we dive into questions, I just wanted to touch on 2 things to highlight. You know, this is an area that, from a budgetary perspective, it's a relatively it's less than $1 million over 300+ million. But as you can hear from Carla's presentation, right, human resources is critical to all 940 full-time employees and the 250 seasonal employees. So it has everything to do with the culture of our organization and its work ethic and performance. And Carla and her team really do a fantastic job. I think one of the most illustrative pieces is our self-funded health plan. So for those of you who are new to the council, to put this in perspective, as Carla said, rate increases, only 1 rate increase in the past 7-8 years is unheard of. Maybe even more importantly, Carla, what's the total cost of a family premium, employee contribution and the city's contribution, roughly? And I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier.
Well, the city contributes $846 on a composite rate. So whether you're a single or, you know, employee spouse or employee family, the city contributes $846 a month. And that was a huge concern 8 years ago. That was a lot of money, but we've been so thankful and grateful actually that we've been able to maintain that, and it has not changed in 8 years. And then, of course, then the city and then the employees, as you know, if you're on our plan, pay a certain premium depending if it's employee, spouse, or whatever. But we'd probably be at a composite rate of about $1,000, which for a family plan is relatively inexpensive.
So when I left the Montana League of Cities and Towns group that was created out of MMIA for self-funded plans across the state of Montana, an average family premiums running about $1,700 to $1,800 a month in 2017, $18. It's the same thing I saw in the private sector. So when Carla says this plan is saving our taxpayers millions of dollars every year, and it's doubling down continually on being innovative in promoting wellness amongst our employees. And that's really the only way you keep premiums down, is you keep people healthy. So it's tempting with the reserve levels there, because that is a lot of cash, but in 20 years of self-funding, you can go through a lot of cash in a hurry, and you can't plan for it, or you don't know when it's going to happen. But most importantly, we have an healthy employee group. We're investing in prevention and wellness, and it's paying big dividends and saving taxpayers a lot of money. The other piece I wanted to touch on very briefly, and then turn it over to your guys' question, is about property insurance. The last few hailstorms we've determined have resulted in probably north of $5 million in damages to our buildings. Prior to some of the changes we've made in the past 12 months, we weren't going to turn in any claims. We were saying, oh, we got about $100,000 in property damage. Well, the work of Kevin, the work of Carla, the work of HR to make sure that we were following through as we should has resulted in us doing what we need to do. No one wants to turn in claims like that, but even worse is to have all that damage to city property and not be having those properties fixed and repaired. So that's a project. It's going to take us a few years to repair all that, but we were in a position where no one was going to do anything about that a year ago. So with that, I just thank you guys. Thank you, Carla, and we would love to answer your guys' questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. We will open it up for questions. While people, Carla, if you could minimize your screen, then I'll be able to see the other council members. Carla, maybe you could also just comment on disability coverage. We don't offer disability coverage as an option for any employees, do we? Or is that something we've looked into?
You know, Mayor, a couple times we have tried to get short-term and a long-term disability coverage off the ground, and they require, you know, a lot of times a 25% participation from your employees, and we got them down to even 10%. And we've taken 3 attempts at a short-term disability plan, and we have never been able to get 10% participation to get it off the ground. But we do have a long-term disability plan that employees can enroll in. It is a voluntary benefit that they are offered at new hire or can, you know, look into annually. But not very well participated in.
Okay, thank you. I think it's probably good to float that occasionally.
Yeah.
Perspectives may change.
Yeah.
Questions? I see Councilmember Parrington and Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Parrington?
Thank you, Carla. Of course, I didn't understand all of those alphabet things that you went through, but I guess that's for another day. But what I'm trying to find out, I've asked this question before. What is your average starting pay with the city? I know we talked about call centers, people out at the water treatment, you know, just the various starting pays, because when you look at recruitment and retention, I think pay raises versus pension plans or whatever sort of insurance plans they are, the benefits. So I'm just trying to see how the city could improve that recruitment and retention.
You know, Councilmember Parrington, I don't have an answer for what our average salary is because it's so different. It runs across the gamut of, you know, all of our, whether it's fire, police, Teamsters, non-bargaining. And we have several grades within our compensation system and 7 steps. But I mean, I could sure get that. I could get you a median pay by group if you're interested in that, and email that to all of you. But I don't have that off the top of my head. But as far as benefits, you know, we do offer good benefits as far as vacation and sick time and retirement. And our health insurance benefits an extremely great benefit. But we have been losing people. You know, to turn over 132 positions is by far, our turn is usually 7 or 8%. And it was 14 last year.
So Mayor, if I could follow up, please.
Sure.
So Carla, and I think what's coming to mind is when we visited the call center, it seems like that their starting pay was $14 and something. And I think they were having a hard time keeping qualified people there for very long. And so, we were talking about, well, do they need to start at a higher rate? Do they need to have a tighter scale as far as, once they're trained and then they go to a higher pay? So,
Councilmember Purington, on that, they start out a little lower. It's probably 15 something or so now, but they promote very quickly within their system. Within a month or two, they get an increase where that's unlike any other position in the city. But it is one that I think, Chris Bukowski mentioned last night that we are doing a salary study, and that is one of the positions that we are studying just to make sure our entry level pay is okay there, because it may need to be increased. But we'll find out. We'll have those results sometime about mid-June.
And that's fine. So, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Carla, just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. You mentioned the health care, the city kicks in $846. That's per employee, and it hasn't changed in a number of years. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilmember Neese.
Is that amount determined by the collective bargaining agreements at all, or is that negotiable amount, or can that be increased or decreased and some of the costs passed on to the employees?
Part of that is dictated by the collective bargaining agreement. We do have a consultant, Gallagher, out of Gallagher Benefits, Don Heilman, and he's the one that sets, he or the company sets the rates or makes the recommendations for the rates to our committee every year. And that 846, it's just evolved over the years, but I wish I could remember. In 2001, actually in January of 2001, we weren't paying, when city employees didn't pay anything for health insurance. It was totally free. And they had a plan, and it was only one plan, and it was a $200 deductible and a $400 maximum out of pocket. That's unheard of. And so then it was, at that time, then the plan was really struggling. And so we went to the unions and said, hey, we can't continue to pay 100% of your premium and stay self-funded. We're going bankrupt. So at that point, then we developed the health insurance committee, and that's when we had to put language in all the contracts that if there's an increase, and what the increase is let's say we had $11 million in claims and we think it's going to go to $14 million. That $3 million increase then is split 50-50 with the city. Of course, the city takes a big chunk of that at 50-50, and then the other 50% is split out with all the employees, and that's how the consultant breaks all that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that percentage point could be a negotiating tool within the next collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's 50. Yeah, it's 50% of the increase.
Mary, if you don't mind, just a quick follow-up on the same topic.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Carla. I recently ran across this with my company where and it's not unusual. I've seen it in other companies now too, where if you're paid a wage, a minimal wage, then the city kicks in more than someone who maybe makes, $50,000 or $80,000 a year, or someone who makes, $150,000 a year. So has this committee looked at that? Because even, again, I don't know what it's going to cost for the employee portion. It's, looks like it's going to be, $200 or $300. But is that something you guys have considered? Because I've noticed the industry has moved a little bit more that way as I have looked at different companies. And that, can you address that?
Councilmember Neese, the committee has looked at that. It has been a part of discussions before in meetings, but we've been fortunate, as we say, in the last 8 years to not even have to talk about increases. So, but believe me, when we have, it has been a part of those discussions. If should somebody making more money pay more toward their health insurance premium? And we have had those discussions, but again, we've been fortunate that we've been able to maintain for so long that we haven't had to talk about it.
And I guess why I'm bringing that up is if you're talking about retention, we want to make sure we have not only affordable housing, but affordable health care. And if we can retain some employees that if they're making a lower wage, we also give them a break on the same premium that someone else is making, maybe double what they're making, that would be beneficial. So I would hope that you would look into that to help the city's employees that maybe are not making as the large amount, that actually would help the committee could help out and then negotiate something to that effect to give those lower wage employees a little bit of break.
Okay, we can sure talk
Okay.
about that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Other questions for Carla? Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you. I first of all wanted to say I'm someone who has been on the free market paying these exorbitant healthcare costs, and so these numbers are really astronomically low. I feel like it's a huge incentive for city employees, the rates that they're paying. That seems to me like something we need to keep. But so my question really is, because you're the human resources director, and you, I assume, see people from all city departments that are leaving their jobs for various reasons. What are they telling you are the reasons they're leaving? Are they leaving for other jobs in Billings generally? Are they leaving for other jobs in other cities? Is it just all about money? I mean, I'm just kind of looking for your perspective in general as sort of the expert in the people who are leaving for other jobs.
You know, if they're leaving for other jobs, it's typically money. It truly is. And you know, you try to sell your benefits, and a lot of times I think that's what they don't know when they get there. You'll hear sometimes people come back and say, wow, I had no idea I was going to be paying $500 or $600 a month for health insurance. You know, I should have checked that out. They may be making more money, but in the end, they're making less. And of course, we have a lot of retirements too, because we do have a lot of people that stay for, you know, 25, 30 years at the city. So all of our people leaving definitely aren't going to other jobs. But when we do lose them, it's for money.
Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, Carla, is out of that 132, do you have an idea of how many were for retirement reasons?
You know, I pulled that. Yeah, I pulled that number too, and I don't recall off the top of my head. I was going to put it in my budget presentation initially, and I shouldn't. I didn't, so I'll make a note to do that next year. But I have it, and I can email that out.
Okay, and if I may,
Please.
Mayor, of the people that are leaving, now we all understand that trying to hire a policeman's like the toughest there is.
Yeah.
The other positions are easy to fill.
Are the other positions easy to fill?
Right. Yeah, the
No.
other vacancies that are created. I know there's no problem filling a fire department vacancy.
Okay. Yeah. However, though, there's a lot less people that go through that consortium, that testing than ever too. There's a lot less of those. Probably because they have, there's never a lot of open positions, you know, so you go through all of that every year and you may not get on anywhere. We have difficulty with still our mechanics, transit bus operators. Our communication center right now is probably our worst, as Councilmember Purington brought up. So those are areas that we really need to look at. But mechanics, electricians, communication center dispatchers, and bus drivers. Those are probably the hardest, along with police, to recruit. So.
Righty, thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Carla, that group that leaves, can you generalize, since we've gone from 7 to 8% departure rate to 14%, can you generalize and say that those tend to be early hires in their career, mid-career, or late career? What trends are you seeing? Where are we having problems most in retaining or hiring?
Mayor, really, it would be probably in the 1 to 7, 1 to 5. If we can keep someone 5-6 years, we can usually, in most cases, keep them, depending what their position is. But yeah, it's the early ons. We don't lose a lot of people other than police. Police may tend to lose people to the other agencies, the FBI or whatever, DEA. But typically, we usually lose them in the 1 to 4, 1 to 5 years, I guess would be the best way to say that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Carla? Councilor Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Carla, are the steps in longevity also a part of the collective bargaining agreements?
Longevity pay is correct.
What about steps?
Steps are as well.
Okay, and then you mentioned that you do the collective bargaining agreement. Have you looked at using a third party or outside consultant to do that?
Councilmember Neese, we have looked at that. When Tina was here, probably, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, we looked at that and presented that to the council at that point, and it was about $100,000. And at that point, they decided not to go forward with that. To be honest, I have mixed feelings about that, and I'll tell you why. When I first started 20 years ago, it was like it wasn't like anybody worked for the city. They all worked for different companies. It was really shocking to me. You had police on one side, you had fire, you had Teamsters, and they were all just in for themselves. And it wasn't like we worked for one employer with a common goal or a common vision. And I think, the years that we did use there were times in my tenure where we did have an attorney as the spokesperson for the negotiations, and it crushed trust. I mean, there was no trust. It was really sickening to me, because I couldn't figure out why we all work for the same company, and why are we so different, and why do we have these different ideas, and what that, I think, bringing that labor attorney in, it was very intimidating to those groups. I don't know that we got any better agreements, but we shattered trust, and so I think that has been my number one goal as the HR director here, is to have good working relationships with people, and you can still do that and not give the farm away. I know there's going to be days you guys are going to argue that, but it would make my job easier, to be very honest, if you hired a labor attorney. But I just feel it just shatters everything I've tried to do.
Great, thank you.
I'm being brutally honest.
Nope,
Chris.
thank you.
Thank you, Chris Bukowski.
My brief addition there would be similar. In 3 cities in Montana, 20 plus years, I've had one strike. That strike was, it was going on when I hired in, and it was outside third-party negotiator. And the table is both a place that there's definitely some tension, but I believe when you treat people respectfully, even when you disagree strongly about issues, it is a place where you can build trust and transparency. It's one of the benefits, I think, about negotiating in the public sector. I wouldn't want to do this in the private sector, negotiate labor contracts. In the public sector, it's all public information. We got no profit margin to hide. We've got no numbers to hide. So we really, I would never say never, but I would agree with Carla. It tends to result in we're going to put up our fists now, and we're going to go at it, and we'll bring in our national people, and you got your hired gun, and we'll get way beyond long-term benefits and into who can win this kind of fist fight. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're at the conclusion with you, Carla. I don't see anybody else raising their hands. So thank you very much for this valuable information. Thank you for your job. Great job that you do. I hope you'll communicate that to your staff. They do a great job and some great results here. So
Will do.
appreciate
Thank
the
you.
information.
Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, thanks very much. That concludes item 1A. We'll move on to item 1B, which is the legal department. Brent Brooks, our city administrator, I assume will be leading us through that. Chris Kukulski, is there anything you would want to do in the way of an introduction to item 1B, the legal?
I don't want to take too much thunder away from Brent, but you do see one of the positions that was in the public safety levy, that being a prosecutor. And I think Brent will cover it, why we thought in light of even if we can't do a public safety levy this year, we just really need to do something to try to lower that per prosecutor rate to the benefit of our those who are being victimized. So I'll leave it at that. But that was a piece. I don't think really much of anything else you'll see in the budget. There's some capital in fire each year, but this position I think is the only position that was in the public safety levy that's in this proposed budget either way. So Brent, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. Brent, it's all yours.
All righty. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I appreciate the opportunity. I know you've got a lot of ground to cover tonight, so I will try to keep this very brief and hopefully we'll answer any of your questions. If I cannot, then obviously we'll get back to you with the answers. Some of the newer members of Council probably are not quite as familiar as the more seasoned Council members, but the first 2 or 3 slides gives you an idea of who we are and what we do. And our department is divided equally and naturally into criminal prosecutions for all misdemeanors committed within the city limits of Billings, and some ancillary offenses such as probation, revocations, etc. And then we do civil work as well. We have 4 attorneys on the criminal division, 4 in the civil. And then you can see all the support staff that are absolutely essential to the functions of our office. And I will say that we have a very seasoned crew and they are a delight to work with. We'll just dive right into some statistics here to give you an idea of a little bit of what those individuals that you just saw do. This is for calendar year 2019. We'll talk a little bit more about caseloads in some bar graph slides a little bit later in the presentation, but this gives you some idea of what the previous calendar year looked like. New cases can be 1 or 2 counts, or they can be several counts. So we count each case regardless of how many offenses were committed within the confines of that one case. When you see the words reviewed for possible warrants or warrant requests, those are files that are sent over from the police department usually to our office for review where a request or an arrest has not been made, and there may be a need for further review to see which particular charge is appropriate based on the facts. And just wanted to mention that we receive a lot of warrant requests each year, which is normal and natural. And the county attorney's office also on the felony side receives numerous warrant requests as well. Another major chore of our and responsibility of our criminal division is revocations of probationary sentences, as well as revocations of pretrial bond and other sentencing conditions that the court alerts us to that a criminal defendant has failed to obey. This gives you a little bit of a comparison of the misdemeanor cases opened the last few years. This one is for 2019, and we'll get into an annual comparison here in a minute. Ben Halverson, who is on the line, along with Gina Dahl, our assistant city attorney, really do a great job in so many aspects, and we're very lucky to have both of them. But we're lucky to have all of our prosecutors here, very experienced, and this gives you an idea of their caseload this last year. Here are the top criminal misdemeanor cases compared to 18 versus 19. I know this slide is kind of busy, but if you look at it, you will see that the red and the blue for each offense is a comparison. I will point out that you see a spike, if you will, in the DWRS for 2019 and 2018. NOINS stands for no insurance. DWRS stands for driving while revoked or suspended. In part, that is attributable to the great job that the Uniform Division headed by Rich St. John, our chief, has done. And I did talk to Assistant Chief Jeremy House about this just a few days ago, and he believed that in part it was from what we call the STEP program, or Special Traffic Enforcement Program, being more intensive about traffic offenses. Because the public and U11 folks, and of course our administrator, Chris, requested those kind of things. But these give you the top misdemeanor criminal cases opened, comparing calendar year 18 and calendar year 19. Here is the comparison that I mentioned just a minute ago. This shows you the trend, if you will, from 2017 through the first quarter of 2020. Again, there is a incremental but steady increase. And again, this is another statistic that when we get to describing the requested prosecutor supports that position. I know we've talked about this quite a bit with public safety mill levy discussions with you folks. And again, this is a statistic that bears out that really substantial need for that additional 5th prosecutor. Warrant request, again, this is a comparison by year. And again, these are cases that come to the city attorney's office where an arrest has not been made yet. And this is part of what the core responsibilities of our prosecutors are. They review these, they confer with the officers or detectives involved and determine if an offense should be charged, if so, what it is. Sometimes there's meetings and follow-up with law enforcement or victims or witnesses that go into that. And this is, again, one of the large functions of our prosecutorial criminal division, and is time consuming, but it's the right thing to do and appropriate. Revocation requests involve not only probationary revocations of probation after a person has either pled guilty or been found guilty and sentenced by Judge Kolar, but also it involves revocation of pretrial bond conditions, for example. And so quite often a person will have pretrial conditions. It could be no contact with a victim. It could be all sorts of ancillary requirements that the judge has established for the public safety, as well as to minimize the person committing another offense while pending trial. And so these, again, are encompassing numerous items that our prosecutors also have to review. And these requests come in typically from one of 2 different private misdemeanor probation companies here in town. And you can see that these, again, are significant, and they do take time to review and determine what is the most appropriate revocation petition, as we call it, to file. Public records request, as you folks know, is also a core duty of our office that was assigned to us about 6 or 7 years ago. We have one of our civil deputy attorneys, Tom Party, does a superb job handling this along with one of our legal assistants. It can be a matter of looking at a record for a few minutes, or it can take a significant amount of time to review a record and determine are there parts that can be disclosed, parts that should not be for various reasons. And we always start with the premise, okay, is this a public record? And if so, it should be disclosed. Now, what are the reasons why it should not be? And the vast majority, of course, are disclosed depending on the subject matter. And we do work quite closely with Denise Bowman, our city clerk, with these requests, and we try to do our best. Sometimes, occasionally, one will get buried in email requests, but we do try to turn these around depending on the request and the significance of it. Sometimes there's a volume of email requests, for example, where we have to enlist the support of our IT department to help us find those. Here are the funding sources for the city attorney's office. There are basically 4. I know you see 3 circles there, but general fund and public works account for the bulk of the funding sources for our office. You may ask, well, why is public works included? Right now, we have a dedicated 3/4 time attorney primarily doing, I would say, 80 to 90% of her function is to assist public works. I probably spend about 15 to 20%, depending on the issue. Also, with public works issues, it's a large department, very complex. And again, we discovered over the years that it did require a more intensive assignment, and Dave Mumford and his crew at Public Works have recognized that and have agreed to contribute to the funding for that position. The other 2 funding sources, even though they may seem small, they're very important to our office with a modest O&M and personal services budget. One of them on the left, as you see, is the domestic violence grant from the Montana Board of Crime Control that has typically accounted for about 4% of the total budget. And then statutory surcharges, the statute there is referenced, and that is about 2.5%, and those are imposed as part of sentencing in municipal court. So let's talk just very briefly about the new prosecutor position and the request. This gives you a little bit of some ongoing and some one-time cost. We'll get to a bar graph here in just a minute that shows what the caseloads look like right now and what they would look like if we do add a 5th prosecutor. But I wanted to include this slide primarily to say we're at a crucial point, because The morale of our prosecutors is certainly at issue. And in fact, we did have one, our most experienced, at least in city years, prosecutor decided to leave last summer, in part because of the caseload, in part because that person wanted to go out in private practice. But one of the major factors, as communicated to me, was the unsustainable caseload. And I think the other prosecutors would tell you that. So we're hoping with the recommendation of Chris and U11 folks that we can get at least some of the relief that these individuals need. The last bullet point there tells you that we're obviously grateful if the council were to approve this position. It will reduce the caseload. There's no question about that, but it still will be above the informal ABA recommendation. But again, this greatly helps. This slide is the one I referenced just a minute ago. This shows you a couple of comparisons in the calendar years for 17, 18, and 19. The light blue on your screen is the informal ABA recommendations for misdemeanor prosecutors. The solid blue is indeed the cases that are DV cases. And then the middle light blue, if you will, or kind of an aqua blue colored, are the non-DV cases. And the little red line in between, as you see with the reference drawn with the small line, the middle bar graph, that shows you what the caseload will look like if a fifth prosecutor is added to the criminal division prosecuting crew. So I will say that Andy Zeller did a great job of suggesting that middle bar and showing the reduction in the cases. It is definitely significant, although it still is higher than what we would like, obviously, but it does show the prosecutors that, hey, help is on the way, and this will greatly reduce their caseload right now, even with just one prosecutor. So let's go through a couple of 2 or 3 slides about the numbers. This shows you the personal services, which is the salary and benefits for the entire office. The domestic violence grant salary and benefits are carved out because the city has a match each year. This year we have requested about $90,000 for the Domestic Violence Board of Crime Control pass-through grant, and it has been preliminarily recommended by a committee of the Board of Crime Control to approve that full $90,000. That is an important grant for us, and we have held that grant for about 20 years, which is significant because, as most of you folks know, grants often last in a permanent term of 4 years, perhaps 6 years, but it's very crucial to our operations. $90,000 may not seem like a lot of money, but it certainly is huge to our operation. Here is the O&M comparisons between fiscal year 20 and 21. You will note that there is an increase. A lot of that is attributable to the new fifth prosecutor position. You will also see that there is zero O&M with the domestic violence grants. That's because the city's match includes O&M for the domestic violence unit. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that briefly. Here is a little more breakdown about the domestic violence grant operating revenues comparison between last year and this year. Again, the revenues really come from the grant fund pass-through by Congress. It's called the Violence Against Women Act, and it is a pass-through to the states, allocated to each state. And then the Montana Board of Crime Control determines which localities that have a grant-funded operation receive how much money. It is an annually renewable application for this grant. It takes a lot of time to renew. And there are also quarterly and weekly and monthly statistical record keeping that is fairly intensive, that Ben Halverson, our domestic violence prosecutor, does a great job, along with our victim witness specialist and our part-time legal assistant dedicated to our domestic violence unit. And you also see the city matches going up mainly because of steps and COLAs. Some accomplishments, and again, these are just a few. I know some of these actually are the council's accomplishments. For example, the noise ordinance. One of the other things that with the council's support, you have noticed lately that code enforcement has been making some progress. Great shout out to code enforcement officers and Wyatt Friday and Nicole Cromwell. They've done a superb job. We are making incremental progress. Just wanted to mention that. And some of the other things here, I won't spend a lot of time. Municipal court has gone to a mostly paperless filing system. That is not something you just do overnight. We are gearing up for the legislature in 2021 or 2021. That will require additional preparation. And of course, as you folks know, in conjunction with several other departments, primarily Mr. Bukowski and Andy Zeller, police and fire, we've done a significant amount of public safety mill levy research. Future goals and challenges, these are all listed there in no particular order of importance. There are some others that I really just didn't have time to, or not time, but space to list. It doesn't mean that they're any less important. For example, Carla mentioned the collective bargaining agreement negotiations. I would anticipate that our Assistant City Attorney, Gina Dahl, who's done a great job assisting HR and Carla and her staff on a variety of issues, will be in on at least some of those bargaining teams. I was on the fire department bargaining team for city administration the last time. It actually went quite well, and I would hope that it goes that well again. There are some other items here, for example, continuing to be vigilant and address the homeless and the transient issues that we know are occurring on a daily basis. I know that I have sent out a couple of times a PowerPoint that I co-presented about a year ago that gives you a lot of the legal challenges and societal challenges that we have with that issue. But again, I wanted to mention that even though I didn't list it here, I very well could have and perhaps arguably should have, because it is not only a future challenge, but a current ongoing challenge. For the criminal division, we've covered this a little bit already. As most of you folks know, the misdemeanor caseload is not only heavy, but it's very fast paced. We try our best to keep track using our case management software that's actually mentioned in the last bullet point here. There are some other things here that are self-explanatory, so I won't spend a lot of time on those. The third from the bottom, staffing level bullet point gives you a snapshot in time of the criminal attorneys comparison between Billings, Missoula, and Bozeman. So as you can see, along with the public defender's office, those 6 attorneys are dedicated to misdemeanor prosecutions, not misdemeanors and felonies. So you can see we're kind of losing ground without this 5th additional prosecutor. And the only comparison here, but is compared with the previous statistical slides in bar graphs. So that's pretty much my presentation. Thank you for listening. I will say this, this is the 22nd budget presentation, I think, or at least participating. I've been here almost 22 years, and it continues to be a privilege and an auspicious honor to serve you folks and Chris and Kevin, the other department heads. And I do have a great affinity and a loyalty for the myriad of challenging and difficult policy decisions that you make. And it's not often that I have that opportunity to express my great appreciation and empathy and loyalty to all of you folks.
Well, thank you, Brent, and great presentation. Lots of information there. Appreciate everything that you do and your department does under difficult staffing constraints, obviously. So thank you. We'll open it up for questions for Brent. Council have questions. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I wanted to ask, good evening, Mr. Brooks. I wanted to ask about one of the future challenges that you have listed, just where case management software supporting ending in calendar 2021. Is that something that is a part of the budget where money is set aside for tech improvements, or is kind of thing where you put money aside for that, or how exactly is that going to work? Thank you.
Yes, great question. I could have spent a little bit more time on that. JustWare is a very well-known criminal division case management software. We do use it for public records request management as well, keeping track of when something came in, when it went out, what were the actual documents provided, that sort of thing. And it is built into our O&M budget each year. Unfortunately, and we're still in the first stages of investigating this, the company that created this software management system called Journal Technologies is going to a new software case management system. It doesn't mean that we can no longer use JustWare. It just means that, and they have not identified a specific date to my knowledge, but sometime in 2021, they will no longer what they call support the software for this case management system. And so we are looking internally, and in fact, we're going to try to meet in the next week, our Assistant City Attorney, Gina Dahl, myself, and our legal assistants, to see what our options are, see what their cost would be, see what alternatives there are. And of course, when you switch, if you switch to a different management system, that is a significant learning curve. So we're trying our best to determine what is our best course of action. And like many other software programs, when you come to rely upon this, it is a huge issue to learn something new. And so we're trying our best to assess what's going to happen in the future. There are some competing case management software out there, and we'll look at that. But like many things that happen in the IT and software world, at some point we do have to roll with the punches on something like this. And that's hopefully answers your question. And that's why I put that there, because it is a future challenge. It's not a challenge for tomorrow or next week, but it is coming. And I'm sure that we'll mention it and allocate for it in fiscal year 2022's budget.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Brent? Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. Brent, I had emailed you earlier some of the questions that I had relating to domestic violence. And so if I can just share those questions, and we'll let you and or Ben go from there. And I shared them with Bill and Chris as well. So one of the things that I find really interesting is that domestic violence is prosecuted at a city level, because this is really such a violent crime and a horrific crime. So if you could share a little bit about that, about why it's prosecuted at a city level and not maybe at a district court level or really even a federal level, because it is such acts of violence.
Yeah.
You know, and we had that conversation with Judge Kolar on recidivism, and we talked about that in regard to substance abuse, whether it be drugs or alcohol. Could you share with the numbers that you showed in regard to the cases for domestic violence, how many of those are they reoffenders, or are those brand new offenders? You know, this is the first time that these cases have come before the city. And then also in regard to this grant that seems to be so important to the budget in regard to how we go after domestic violence abusers. What's the government's responsibility in enforcing domestic violence laws? Because I imagine that we as a city have a responsibility to do that. And then also, what are the services that Judge Kolar has at, or what are the resources she's got to either help offenders to get treatment? Is there such a thing that an offender can get treatment? And do we provide victim services? And if so, what are those?
Yes.
A long list. So thanks, Brent.
Your Honor, Councilwoman Ronning, all great questions. I hope that Ben and I can remember all of those. Please remind us if we don't address all of those questions. Those are all excellent questions. I will make a few comments to kind of set the stage, and then I'll call upon Ben, who's online here, to answer the lion's share, because he's in the trenches every day, and I might be able to give you some very high altitude answer that kind of sort of answers your specific questions, but really doesn't. I will say that by state statutes, a certain number of convictions are prosecutable as misdemeanors with certain domestic violence cases. And one of the things that Ben tries to do, and we all try to do in our office, is to make sure that domestic violence offenders are caught, if you will, not just simply because they committed the offense, but to try to make sure that they don't graduate, if you will, to committing felony domestic violence or worse, more severe bodily harm type felonies that end up in district court. So that's one reason that we do prosecute them within the confines of the city limits, is because certain offenses or convictions are required by state statute to be misdemeanors. And of course, misdemeanors within the city of Billings are within the city attorney's office jurisdiction. Certainly, Ben and our victim witness specialist, we have 2 victim witness specialists that are devoted full time to working with Ben and administering to domestic violence victims. That can be administering to them on a whole host of resources and making the resources available, lethality assessments, safety plans. Ben could certainly go into that more in depth. And of course, getting orders of protection is necessary, or assisting them in that process is very important. And that is a standalone offense also, orders of protection violation. Those are very critical to the safety of our domestic violence victims. I think it would be better to hear the specifics from Ben rather than listen to me kind of talk about in high altitude platitudes. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind taking some time to address Councilwoman Running's questions, that would be great.
Ben Halverson, you're with us, I hope. Feel free to get on here. One item that Councilman Running asked about was the recidivism rates. It was a general question, what you can maybe comment about that. And also, since we do get federal dollars, what our local obligation is to make sure we're spending those dollars appropriately on domestic violence prosecution. Ben Halverson, all yours.
Mayor, Councilwoman Ronning. So with regard to recidivism, I would say at least a majority or more than half will reoffend of men I prosecute. And mostly I say men because most of the people I prosecute are men. Many of those will reoffend within 2 years, and the majority will reoffend within 10. The last time I looked at this for how long it took an offender to, I guess, graduate to the felony level, it was an average of 9.4 months. So that can be getting 2 convictions, that could be a misdemeanor and then jumping to a strangulation offense. And so what we're trying to do is at least identify these most dangerous individuals. And, many studies show that there is not much we can do to reform domestic abusers. What we try to do is work with victims to make sure that they are not re-victimized, so that they can kind of understand what a healthy relationship is, and that using law enforcement, we can create some distance between the victim and the abuser, so that this cycle does not continue and get passed on to children. So that would be my answer for the recidivism. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, sorry about that. Couldn't get to my mute button.
And so the next question, as I wrote it down, was just the general for the grant. So the Violence Against Women Act works really well for our office. It's really allows us to get involved with misdemeanors. We work in conjunction with the Billings Police Department and Officer Nash, who has her own separate grant. And basically it allows us to specifically target these types of offenses. There are a number of different grants provided, for example, for DUIs and other different offenses. And these, dating back to 1994, have allowed prosecutors across the country, and then specifically here in Montana, to target these offenses in ways that they were not targeted before. And it's probably worth pointing out, domestic violence was not a recognized offense until 1985. So it's, just over 30 years we've been working on this. And I guess with regard to obligations for law enforcement, there are state statutes that impose what you would call a special relationship between law enforcement and domestic violence victims. And if law enforcement does not do its part to protect domestic violence victims, juries have awarded verdicts to surviving children of murdered victims. The Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, has upheld those verdicts. And municipalities can be held liable for not following the law. So that is one requirement that has been on the books, to the best of my knowledge, since at least the early 90s. And then finally, the fifth question, as I wrote it down, was treatment, and that kind of goes back to the recidivism component. Domestic violence is not an addictive, it's not an addiction, and it is not a mental health problem. It is just, mostly it boils down to a personality disorder, which are very difficult to remedy and fix. So we are trying to mitigate the damage, I would say, at the misdemeanor level, and do our best to make sure that if they are going to reoffend, it's not going to be against the same victim.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Brent. I bring that up because we've heard from Chief St. John that domestic violence is one of those crimes that the police have seen increase, and they go to so many of those calls. And also, it seems as though this grant is really critical to our public safety funding. And I can't imagine if we lost this grant, just in how big of a hole we would be in with that. So thank you, Ben. I know that like with most grants, it's important that those that award the grants see that the city is supportive of the work that's being done within that community regarding domestic violence. So thank you, and please let us know however we can help make sure that this grant continues to happen for the city. Thank you again.
Thank you. Other questions for Brent? Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up to what Penny was asking, so Ben, I suppose you or Brent could answer this. I would imagine that the police that respond to these cases, it would be determined by the amount of injury, whether it goes to misdemeanor or to district court.
Your Honor and Councilwoman Purington, it depends on the facts. It could very well be that it would be a felony, and I'll let Ben opine here as well, but it really depends on the facts and the severity of the injury. And sometimes cases are initially referred to the county attorney's office for a felony, and they review it, they look at the elements of the offense by statute, they look at the facts, and then sometimes they believe, and it's within their discretion, that it is better charged as a misdemeanor, and so then it does come back to us for review and prosecuting. And I'll let Ben supplement what I just said.
So, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Purington, the first two offenses are misdemeanors unless they are a standalone felony offense. So in 2017, we passed Montana's version of a strangulation statute. We were the 44th state to do that. That reduced my caseload the first year by about 50 cases, and it has since rebounded and then some. So now that the county attorney's office has jurisdiction over those offenses, those are a completely separate category, but first two are misdemeanors unless they are something much more serious. I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. So Mr. Mayor, could I have a follow-up? This is what my real question was.
Go ahead.
So Brent, I think it was slide number 12, the one where you said Andy did such a good job of doing your bar graph there for you.
Yes.
And you had put in for this one prosecutor at 147.5 in the budget for that. What would that graph look like with a second prosecutor, and would it be at the same amount? Would it just be double?
Your Honor and Councilmember Purington, great question. We can get you what it would look like reducing the caseload further. We will definitely do that. We could have added that, but quite frankly, I didn't want to be presumptuous and add a second prosecutor to that list, because we are very mindful of the fact that citywide, there are very few positions that are being recommended as new positions. So I didn't want to be presumptuous and add a second prosecutor position. So we will get that to the council in terms of how much further reduction in the caseload. And would it be simply a reproduction or a duplication of the 147 plus or minus? I'll get with Andy on that. It may not be exactly double, but that's a great two-part question, and we'll get that information to you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Sure.
I think what it would boil down to is also what does it take to get down to that ABA recommendation?
Yarn, Councilwoman Purinton, we will look at that also. I know that in our preliminary public safety mill levy discussions, we've had several work session discussions with you folks on that. Certainly 2 prosecutors would reduce it significantly. I don't think it would get right down to the, again, informal ABA standard of 400 cases a year. But we can provide that as well. We'll provide what does a second prosecutor look like, reducing that caseload further, how much would that second prosecutor cost, and then how many additional prosecutors would it take to get close to the 400 or 500 caseload per year limit. We'll provide all those to you. But again, I didn't want to be presumptuous and say, oh, by the way, here's what a second or third attorney would provide.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Brent, while we're on that topic, I'll ask what might be the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is, what difference do these high numbers make? I'm looking at your 2019 totals for non-DV cases, and it's 1,814 per prosecutor, compared to the ABA recommended best standard of 400. So it is well over 400% of that number. I doubt anybody is anywhere near the 400 ABA recommended, but that's at least a number. Maybe better is my recollection in Missoula, the number was in the 800s, and I could be wrong about that. And in Bozeman, perhaps in the 300s. So that really is close to the ABA standard. So what gives? Even if we assume that you and Ben work a lot harder than anybody else in the state of Montana, and even if we assume that you're a lot more efficient and that our municipal court is a lot more efficient, that only accounts for so much. Something is going wrong in the system, or something is happening with those other cases. Based on my experience, I would assume it's they're just being pled out at a much higher rate. Our city attorney's office is probably unable to take things to trial, which is sort of the ultimate threat for defense attorneys, because trials take so much time. Tell us what is the real problem with these high numbers, in addition to, of course, additional stress and pressure on yourself and your attorneys.
Well, I don't know if it's a problem so much as it is just the quantity. As the city grows, and Your Honor and Counsel, excuse me, as the city grows, a significant part of this concerns revocations of sentences where you have people reoffending, not just in the domestic violence type of offenses. You're absolutely right also that certain, perhaps arguably less severe misdemeanor offenses, the persons typically are going to plead guilty, and we have to kind of triage, if you will. I know that's kind of an extreme example, but prioritize which cases we're going to emphasize over others. And obviously domestic violence, any kind of bodily injury or assault cases are going to have our highest priority. We also try our best to make sure that we have some standard sentencing recommendations based on what the court has done in the past. And the other thing that certainly is at play here is making sure that our prosecutors do our best to get plea offers to defense counsel as early as possible. There's a lot of things once a criminal case starts that I could talk about that would we would be here all night, but there are certain cascading deadlines of the court that have to be met by both prosecutor and defense attorneys. That certainly takes time and effort too. I don't know if there is a problem. What I do see is the city is growing, and part of this problem could probably be attributed to me. We have periodically, not every year, but periodically requested another prosecutor. And I understand that priorities have to, there always has to be other priorities, but we have not added a prosecutor since 2007. And so we've done just the best that we can. We have added a victim witness specialist full-time in 2016. That was very helpful. But I think it's the growth of the city. Drugs, as Rich St. John will tell you, I'm sure in his presentation, continues to be an issue. And then, as we all know, when a city reaches 100,000 or more, things start to take a little bit increase in terms of growth overall. And with that comes, unfortunately, some of the criminal activities as well. And so I'm hoping I'm addressing some of your questions. And really, at some point, prosecutors can only do so much with the time that they have. And,
okay. Thank you, Brent. I hope I'm not taking too many liberties. I'm just going to ask Ben Halverson, since he's really in the trenches on this. If Ben, if you could just comment, what's the problem with having 851 cases in your case, or 1,800 for the non-DV cases? What's the matter with that? Ben Halverson?
Mr. Mayor, I have to triage constantly, and I can only really focus on the most dangerous. And, we are trained to identify those most dangerous people. It's not an exact science, but that is an evolving field that we are constantly studying. So, Mr. Mayor, we get asked this question all the time at the legislature. Why is this such a problem? And I think part of it is we're better at identifying true domestic violence cases and victims and trying to disrupt those and get victims and children out of that situation. The other part of it is, and we have addressed this previously at the legislature, the Department of Corrections has sent a significant number, hundreds of more people to the city of Billings than they have other locations throughout Montana. And it's not even close. And I calculated just as December that about 20% of my active caseload were felony probationers. So we are faced with a kind of a change in the criminal justice system. But in the other sense, we're also, we are not in the business, I guess, of preventing crime. We are trying to respond to it. I think if you're interested in preventing crime, that happens at the childhood level with the Department of Health and Human Services. I don't know any other way to put it.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions or comments? Chris Kukulski.
Mayor, could I just offer this perspective, which I think the losers, when prosecutors have 850 cases, are the victims. So they have to prioritize. And so somewhere on the cut list, your crime or the crime against you that you were victimized in just isn't as severe as the next person's. And so you end up on the short end of that and you don't get the attention you need. And sadly, the situation has to be bad enough that our prosecutor has no choice but to focus on it. And so I hate to be that dramatic, but I think at the end of the day, that is truly who suffers when we see numbers that are more than 200% on the domestic violence side of the recommendations.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, I am sorry I left this out.
Sure, Ben.
It is important for you to know. My colleague in Bozeman, who had this same job at the time in 2017, she had about 100 cases per year for purpose of comparison. So it is very difficult, and I would say I very rarely now prosecute non-intimate partner domestic violence cases. So brothers, sisters, fathers, sons, I do not have the resources to prosecute those cases.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We should wrap up soon, but are there other questions for Ben or for Brent Brooks? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Brent, your chart shows that the misdemeanor and non-traffic cases increased, about $1,400, and that $1,400 cases in 2019, and they're also on trend to do that this year. And I can only think that Chris has asked the police chief to actually hire more police officers throughout the city. This has helped increase the caseload to your department, and that's why you're seeing also an increase in cases. And so that's a good thing that we got more police officers out there, and we're now catching the crime, and now you have a responsibility to handle it. And I think that your request for one is more than reasonable in trying to address this, because it'll help it reduce some of the load, but it's not going to eliminate the heavy load on your people. I think Pam's question was appropriate to find out more. But I guess what I'm going to ask you is whether it's one or maybe later on 2 or 3. I've been in your office. There's no place to put them. Where do you plan on putting these staff?
Your Honor and Councilmember Neese, again, another excellent question. Certainly, we're looking at all the options. I know that the Miller Building may be a possibility. There may be a possibility that one of our civil attorneys could work from home, telecommute. Of course, most of our staff, with the exception of about 4 right now, are doing that because of the COVID-19 situation. So we're exploring just about every alternative that we can to appropriately place one or more of those individuals. We've maxed out what we can utilize in the City Hall second floor. As you folks know, we turned a vault into an old finance department vault on the second floor into an office for our domestic violence legal assistant. So I don't know where else in City Hall we would put that person. Certainly, we're going to work with Jessica Iverson, our new facilities director. We'll work obviously with Chris and Kevin and Andy to examine alternatives. And I've even said, hey, if somebody wants my office, that's great. I'll go down to the basement where there's a couple of IT offices. I'm not big on having to have an office. We even looked at perhaps dividing my office into 2, for example. So we're doing our best. We don't have silver bullet answers to your question about space, but we do have several options available to us for that one person. And I hope that that's been of some information to you.
It has, and thank you, Brent. And I guess I would use this time to advocate that we really do have a space issue with our city facilities, and hope that we can address that soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Chris Kukulski, you wanted to say something?
I think we're okay.
Okay, all right. Other questions for Brent? Seeing none, then thank you, Brent. Again, please convey our appreciation to your whole staff. We understand you're laboring under some difficult challenges, but you've done a great job tonight laying those out. Appreciate it all.
Thank you very much, Your Honor and Counsel, and great questions, and we'll follow up with those for you this week.
Okay, on a related topic then is item 1C, our police presentation on budget issues. Chief St. John is with us, and Chris Kukulski, anything before we turn it over to the chief?
I think the chief can run with it. You guys have seen our challenges we've passed out, as well as our strategy for reducing crime, and it is unfortunate for all of us that later tonight we'll talk again about the potential of postponing the public safety levy. But anyways, I turn over to Chief St. John. He can show you what we're trying to do within the means that we have today.
Thank you. Chief, all yours. Chief, I'm not hearing anything if you're talking, but we do see your screen. And that's a very cool picture, by the way. However you got that.
A photographer in the police department, if my recollection is correct. So I can't see.
That is correct.
There, you're with us. We can hear you.
You got it there. I was saying I was coming to you audible only tonight. Chris suggested I do that. It'd be a lot better for me. Having a face made for radio, and that came straight from him. So compliments to Carla, Brent, and Ben. Nice job in their on their presentation. Hope to follow suit with that. So we'll move very quickly with ours. I did not provide a lot of statistics and all that because we provided that for you in our annual report. A lot of the monthly information you get, plus I know a lot of information has come your way ad nauseum from the safety levy talk. So we're moving straight into budget. This is our bottom line up front, specifically a request out of the Public Safety Fund. This is what our anticipated expenses are going to be. As you know, the majority of our budget goes to personal services, 81%. We do not sell a product. We provide a service, and our number one asset is our officers. And they do a great job, as evidenced by things that have been going on. The next biggest expense would be our O&M at 15% of the budget. And then these smaller things will be the debt service is the TIF money that came to help pay for the evidence building. And we went from 2.8 million capital outlay in FY20 to 20,000. And that's going to help us with some of our equipment. And then our transfers is the great majority of it is for equipment replacement and facilities costs. Comparing FY20 to 21, overall, we're going to see a 3% decrease. And again, as I indicated, we had a $2.8 million cost in FY20 that we don't have now. You will see some of our major accounts at ebb and flow, but the bottom line, what we'll be requesting will be a 3% decrease from last year. A reminder that there's no shortage of work for the police department. We had 94,709 calls for service last year. That was I think a 2-3% increase over the year previously. So we're on trend for that again. Comparing the two major accounts that we work out of here would be our personal services. You can see that we have a $1.4 million increase. Primary reason for the increases there would be step COLA and overtime increases and an increase in our comp cash out account. One thing I will tell you that is a direct correlation to some of these increases is that in years past we have paid for things out of salary savings, and now because of our mandates and our staffing, we're using our salaries for what they're designed for, and so some of these other costs now are starting to catch up with us, and they're reflected in our increases. Moving over to the O&M, a $212,000 increase. Primarily that is increase for towing fees, our software subscriptions, our cost allocation, and internal services increases. What I have done for you here is basically broken down that pie chart into columns and rows. So in the row across the top, you can see the division and personal O&M and transfers. And then down the column, you can see the division that it's reflecting on. So if we just go to some of our bigger ones here, the $791,000 in the transfer capital, that's for your equipment replacement, some facilities, our rent out of BOC, and some allocation. The $20,000 is added to our equipment replacement because we are forced to buy SUVs. The Ford is not making the Taurus anymore. The front end of the SUV is a Taurus, so all of the equipment just retrofits in there, but they cost a little bit more money. So we added the additional $20,000 there. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Second page would be the same thing for our records division. And if you remember, animal control belongs to the police department, and they have modest staffing and a modest budget. So as we move to the middle of the page where it says public safety fund total, the 26 million is what is coming out of that fund. Basically your property tax funded public service. And so this is the crux of our safety levy discussion. What I want to point out is that the police department, through various programs and grants and drug forfeiture, is also planning to expend an additional 1.3 million. And so where these are coming from, again, here is your drug forfeiture, your grants primarily for overtime. We pay for 1 FTE in our drug unit out of that. On the supply side of things, we pay for informants, we pay for evidence, we pay for things that are over and above the budget. The 60,000 in the transfer and capital are big equipment purchases, bomb equipment, and we're getting a hostage negotiator vehicle. And then that totals up to the 1.3. So public safety fund request is the 26. One, and then when you add our police program, what our anticipated expenditure would be the 27.8. What we're going to look like as we move forward, and here's where we're at right now. We're authorized 154 and plus 1. Right now, our support staff is down a couple. We are holding on the hiring there because this came about during some furlough discussions. So we'll wait to get some instruction there. And animal control is fully staffed and operational with those numbers. So the challenges, these fall heavily into your wheelhouse and very strategic, obviously, the crux of our safety levy discussion. The funding, we know we have more service demands, staffing, and then recruiting and retention is pretty good for us. We have a lot of people want to come and work for the police department. Fair salary, great benefits, and I say that we are an employer of choice, and you have a lot to do with that, setting that environment. And that is the end of my presentation. Available for questions, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate clarity of your presentation. Questions for the Chief? Questions for Chief St. John from Counsel? Chief, I'm going to just jump right at it. We're going to be talking about item number 2 on the public safety mill levy. I don't know if you plan to stick around to weigh in at that time. If our city administrator prefers that you wait until then, he'll chime in. But one obvious question is, what do you think? I mean, you know the realities that we're looking at with the budget, but you also know the realities we're looking at with COVID-19. Don't want you to leave here if you wanted to comment on the big question of the public safety mill levy.
Thank you, Mayor, for the question. And I'll let Chris have his hand over the mute button there if he wants. But I think 2 options that you need to consider as you move forward with your deliberations. The big thing for us at the police department is we do not want to go backwards. So I don't think that given the current economical environment that it would be prudent to grow the police department and ask for a large amount of money. I think at this juncture that it would be very, very helpful to just keep what we got and live to fight another day. Obviously, the spin-off of that is that that's even too sensitive, and that we postpone for a year since I think Andy's got some calculations there that would be okay for a year, and then try it again or look at it again when the environment's much better. But those would be my 2 observations: is we either pass it on it for a year, or if you do go forward, it's simply to maintain what we have. That's a much more palatable number. We just cannot go backwards. We're doing some pretty good work right now. and I would hate to backslide. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Chief. But other questions for the Chief? Councilmember Purington.
Okay, this is my dumb question.
There are no dumb questions.
Oh, this is dumb. No, so what my question is that whenever you had the 26 million, and it was my understanding that you said that was from the general fund. So then you have public safety 1 and public safety 2. So where, I guess I'm trying to figure out how much money that is coming into that 26-1, because that to me is general fund.
Councilmember Purrington, I'm going to have to defer to Andy on that. To me, that is all the taxpayer money that's coming to the PD, and not quite sure which accounts, but where they all come from would be the taxpayer stuff.
Okay.
Andy, could you explain the flow from the public safety fund to the general fund?
You bet. The 26 million that the chief is referring to is all from the public safety fund. That is also the fund where the public safety tax levy revenue is deposited. The anticipated amounts for public safety tax revenue, both 1 and 2 combined for FY21, is slightly over $13 million. So the remainder, as you are aware, to make up the funding for both police and fire will come from the general fund, along with charges for services for the BUFSA, some grant charges, some state revenues. But the transfer from the general fund will make up nearly $29 million. It was 28.8 actually for FY21. So all those dollars combined will fund police and fire for FY21. Does that answer your question, Councilwoman Purington?
Yes, I think so. So you're going at it from, and I understand that it's public safety, and I shouldn't have implied that it was just for police, but since those budgets are presented separately, so you're saying that you initially get the gist of the funding from public safety 1 and 2, and then whatever needs to be made up is made up out of the general fund. Is that correct?
Generally, yes, that is correct. There are a few other funding dollars that go into the public safety fund, but generally, yes, you are correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, just a quick question, a clarification, and then a confirmation. When I talked to Brent Brooks about the increase in cases, you are staffing a lot more. You've got a lot more police officers on the street. I'm assuming that is what the police does really impacts what the city attorney's caseload is. Is that correct?
Councilmember Neese, that is correct. This is something we've talked about from day one, is that anytime you change anything in the justice system, whether you add something or take it away, it affects everybody else. And so in this particular case, we are more than fully staffed with young officers who are out there, doing a lot of work. We have a lot of citations, a lot of arrests being made, and those all have to be touched by Brent's staff at some point in time. And so there's a direct correlation to that.
Okay. Mayor, if you mind a quick question clarification. Chief, in your presentation, you mentioned personnel services increasing 8%. Now, I don't want people to get the idea that everyone's going to get 8% raise. Can you indicate to me a little bit more clarification on what that 8% is really for?
Yes, Council Member. The 8% is covers step increases. So that is as our officers move on or up the ladder in years, some get pay raises, some don't, depending where they're at. We have cost of living that is coming up, and then we have an adjustment in our overtime expenses. And this goes to my comment about using our salary where it's supposed to be, because we had an issue with overtime last budget, if you recall. And so now we know how much we were spending, and we made adjustments there. The comp cash out is a benefit that's negotiated, which basically allows officers to accumulate time in their comp bank and then cash it out. And if there was a time when we didn't have any money to cover that, and so now again, as people move through steps and COLAs kick in, their bank becomes more expensive to cash out for the city, and so we need to accommodate for that. So it's a combination of all of those things, Council Member. That answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ewald and Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, are you at full patrol staffing right now, or are we still got some officers that are still in training?
We have 155 officers that are on the books, and I want to say there's probably between 8 and 10 that are in various stages of training.
So are those 8 and 10 all officers that will be on the street in patrol?
That's correct, Council Member. The last group that we hired, I want to say 3 or 4, they started right at the onset of COVID, so their training is being virtual and online. And the other officers are all with training officers and soon to be on their own. So yes, they are all patrolmen, and they will all be hitting the street when they complete their training.
So right now, though, we're running about 8 to 10 officers short again.
Well, I wouldn't call it short. They're just not a full-grown donut-eating police officer. They're doubled up with other officers. We use them. They're learning their trade. They're just not on their own. And Mayor, if I may add something.
Sure.
An unintended benefit of the COVID situation for us is that our school resource officers, there are 8 of them, are working the street. We don't have any travel because vacations have pretty much been stagnant, and we don't have any training. So we are fielding upwards to 18 to 20 officers per shift per day, which is where it should be. And it's making a profound impact on our ability to deal with stuff. We are able to handle calls very quickly with multiple officers. Unfortunately, the way we got there was because of the pandemic. But that's been most helpful.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. Chief, this is kind of a 2-part question, but we heard Ben Halverson talk about prevention, and that is one of the methods which we can reduce crime in our community. I've heard you talk about prevention before. So I guess my question is, I think it's Gallatin County, but I'm not 100% positive. I was just trying to find it. It's either Gallatin County or Cascade County that has recently put together a program where they have, I think it's a trained counselor, licensed counselor that goes out on mental health calls and mental health cases. So that frees up the officers to not go onto those calls. And I know that's something that you've talked about before. And that's one of the issues that we get pretty repeated emails about, especially downtown, are some of those substance abuse, mental health issues. If you could share with this council what you think is most important for us to address as we talk about this public safety mill levy in regard to what you need for greater resources for prevention, that would be helpful. We definitely hear about that also from the school district when we do our quarterly meetings. just what they're dealing with at the childhood levels in regard to crime and domestic situations in the home. So if you could share with us what you would like to see in regard to prevention, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, Council Member. I was on a conference call addressing just that very subject this afternoon. There's another grant of which the police department agreed to be the fiduciary to try to get counselors or they're talking about peers, people that have been through it before, to go out and either ride with officers or respond to these situations to try to provide some stabilization, some decompression, and free up law enforcement. The other thing for us is that we need that resource to help us on the street to assess what it is we're dealing with, and then we need a place to take them. And that's the problem that we have right now, especially with the jail being full and under COVID restrictions. The ER is not the place for some of these people. The crisis center is the godsend right now for law enforcement because it's a soft handoff and we can get back to work. And so it's kind of a three-pronged approach for us. Is that, an officer responding, providing security, a social worker or a peer providing the assessment, and then a soft handoff. So again, we know what's causing the problems is our co-occurring substance abuse and mental illness. If we can intervene on the front end, that would be great. That's a lot of the work that's going on right now. But at the end of the day, treatment lacks, clean and sober housing lacks, and you end up with people who can't find a job, can't find a place to stay. They end up couch surfing, and then they reoffend, and we deal with them again, which goes back to your recidivism question. And it's not only just the transient type behavior, but it escalates all the way into criminal, to include some of the domestic situations. So I hope I addressed your question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Chief St. John? Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, one question is, with your fully staffed department now, will the overtime drop significantly? That tends to be a really high number in the budget each year for the police department.
Councilmember Brown, it already has. We are right where we should be for 3/4 of the year expended. It's been helpful. We haven't had any visits, knock on wood, or any great big significant incidents. We are rolling into the summer. I'm having to pay a little bit of overtime to keep a handle on our crazy drivers on the cruising things, but that's something that Mr. Bukowski pointed out and want us to get a handle on. Some of that was self-inflicted, and we've corrected that. So I think you'll be much more pleased with our numbers. And additionally, being fully staffed means we don't have to force people in or hold them over at overtime rate. And again, we're using that budget for what it's designed for, not for other stuff.
Thank you. Other questions for the chief? Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Chief, with this increase of patrol officers, are you seeing less complaints of the traffic situation? Especially, I know it's really bad on the west end, and with nicer weather coming up, that seems to be a real issue, but I think it's year round.
Councilman Purington, our traffic complaints right now are really focused on the cruising situation. And it's not the legitimate car clubs. It's a couple tag-alongs that jump in and just do really idiotic things. But with the warm weather coming, as you know, our motorcycle activity is picking up. We've already had multiple pursuits with some of these motorcycles. And, that's something that, we have the staff to work that problem specifically without calling them off to handle other calls. which we haven't had in the past. So hopefully we can get people identified, we get things toned down, and we won't have any serious accidents or fatalities. That's what our goal is.
Thank you. Chief, you mentioned the downtown situation of transients. It's a chronic problem. We continue to see public intoxication, defecation, all of the vandalism that goes along with that. If we do not increase your downtown presence through a public safety mill levy, which was your original goal to add several officers downtown, is there anything else we can do at current staffing levels? Or are we just in a situation where we need to resign ourselves to wait it out until we can come back and ask for additional money for additional staffing?
Well, Mayor, regardless what resources you give us, the problem that we have with this particular issue is that we have no place to take these people for detox or for medium or long-term care. So, you know, our hands are tied for the most part as law enforcement. So when we drop them off at a treatment facility or the ER or whatnot, their stay is short. If they do get into treatment, there's generally little or no follow-up. And again, the whole system is stressed. So regardless what you allow us to have for resources, the problem is places to take these people where they can get the treatment, the housing, and the care that they need. If that's not there, it's just a vicious circle. And that's what we're dealing with now. These people have no place to go under current COVID situation, and we have no place we can take them. So it's just a matter of you know, chasing them all over the place.
Okay, thank you. We should wrap up soon, but any final questions for the chief? I don't see any, Chief, so thank you very much for the great job you're doing, also under difficult circumstances, but it was interesting to hear that there are some small silver linings of the COVID situation for your staffing availability. That was interesting. So keep it up, and please convey our best to all of your officers and other personnel.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Council, or I'll just point out, we're now at about 7:30. We've got one more item for item 1, fire. I have no preference. Happy to finish this one up and then take a break, or we can take a break now. Would anybody like to press on, or would anybody like to take a break? Councilman Purington does this, which means—
That means take a break.
Okay, I thought maybe you were watching baseball and you were calling
I can.
the runner safe. But okay. Okay, it is 7:30 or very close to it. 7:27. Let's try to be back and start at 7:35. Should be about 8 minutes. presentation for our fire department. Chief Rash, we've got you. So Chris, is there anything in the way of an introduction that you'd like to offer before we turn it over to Chief Rash?
I think similarly with Chief St. John, the conversation we just had, when it comes to Chief Rash, we had some, the better part of a couple $1 million or $1.2 million, I guess, in capital upgrades to the first 7 fire stations in the public safety levy, as well as I think 12 firefighters. So goes without saying that that's a difficult thing to not be able to address, as they've passed on addressing these issues for many, many years. But the budget we've put together continues to try to do that. I think about $250,000 in capital fixes to each of the 7 stations, so that no matter what happens, at least year to year, we're making a little bit of progress on those capital investments. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chief and be available for questions. Thanks, Chief Rash.
Chief, it's all yours.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for this opportunity to present the Billings Fire Department's FY 2021 budget proposal. I'll be falling in line with Chief St. John and the police department and basically presenting budget specific information, because we have talked so many times regarding our public safety mill levy. So we'll keep that kind of narrowed down. First thing I'd like to bring to everybody's attention is that basically, rough figures, we have about 161 employees throughout administration, prevention and investigations, training, 911, communications equipment, suppression. So we have about 160 employees, authorized strength at this point. I think I'd like to kind of preface this, if I could, Mayor and Council, that we actually I'll be addressing like 4 different accounts that the fire department has oversight of. One being Fire 911, the other being the PSAP, or also to get away from the acronyms, the Public Safety Answering Point 911 Fund, which is state funded by fees that are assessed to both hardwire and wireless phones that come to our 911 center for example, the 911 center for operational things, equipment, things like that. That's another budget that we'll be talking about. So these will be separate budget or funds. The third one is our radio communication fund, which is we are the overseer in the Billings Fire Department of the 800 megahertz. That is basically an internal services fund in which the users within the city actually contribute to that fund. We administer that fund. And the last one that we have would be our fire programs funds grants, which are inclusive of any grants that we get, which I'll go into a little more detail when we get to that point. So the first one I'd like to tackle is our Fire 911 fund, which you see on this slide. And I'll try to be somewhat brief on these. If you will refer down to the proposed FY 2021, 21,561,438. That's what our proposal is. Again, Fire 911 specific. The approved FY 2020 was 20,973,126. That's a $588,312 increase, which represents approximately 2.7% increase. That was primarily can be attributed to personnel and O&M increases. The next one is just kind of a pie chart representing somewhat the same thing. The FY 2020 adopted budget that you can certainly look at there with the pie chart, and the FY 2021 proposed. You'll note that as with the police department, our personal services account for about 84%. So that's a big piece of what we have. We can't operate without people, as we all know. We have to fill fire trucks, fire stations. So that's where we're at with that. Our transfers are percentage-wise, our capital. So you can see those comparisons. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. I just want to make sure that hopefully will be a little more, be able to better demonstrate to everybody what we're looking at in comparing our last adopted budget. This is the next fund I was talking about, what I call the PSAP, or Public Safety Answering Point 911 fund, which again is state funded through fees assessed on wireless and hardwire phones. This represents on the total revenue side, proposal 2021, $1,101,760. And then if you go down to total expenditures on that, you will see $1,127,522. That represents a $26,404 increase, and that's primarily attributed to increased personnel costs. Again, this is another pie chart that refers to that for comparison purposes for mayor and council as well. The FY 2020 adopted compared to the FY 2021 proposed. You'll see, and this is kind of the flip side of it, if you will. The O&M is a substantial portion because this is basically for primarily for the infrastructure, the equipment, the things that they need in the 911 center that are eligible purchases through the state program. We'll go into our radio communications fund, the 800 megahertz that I referred to earlier. Again, this is an internal service fund in which other users of the 800 megahertz system within the city of Billings each contribute for charges. Obviously, you can see on the chart interest earned, total revenue that we have on here, and you will see the actual O&M down at the bottom. That will represent a $7,619 increase, and that is based on our anticipated increases for the cost of electricity and propane to take care of our 800 megahertz, the cell towers that provide the backup generators, things like that, so we can ensure redundancy with those programs for police, fire, and other users within the city. This is the last one that I spoke about, the fire programs fund and grants. Now, this is one where our grants for our donations that we might get, contributions, where our hazmat emergency preparedness fund grant lives, where our homeland security grants live, and this you can see is pretty much a significant increase of about $253,850 again increase, but I'm going to call that a good increase because those are actually funds that our folks have worked hard on to work with us and regional hazmat partners to be able to get that money in, but we also have to have the ability through council authorization by a budget to be able to also disperse those funds as well. So when you look at that and you look at that increase that's added in there, even overall, this is actually a good increase if there's such a thing. But that's what that represents. These are just basically some goals. I won't read each of these to you, but just some goals, some things that we've been working on, want to continue to try to do over the next several years to some of our goals, things we want to improve the system, to maintain the system. And if I'm going too fast in these, please let me know. And that's our first one for our goals. And we'll go back to our second one with goals. And nobody's saying I'm going too fast. So at this point, that will conclude our budget FY21 budget presentation. And we'll certainly do our very best to answer any questions that Mayor and Council may have.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Appreciate the presentation. Why don't I start with where I started with Chief St. John, which is the public safety mill levy. You know the realities that we're looking at with COVID-19. Thank you, by the way, for your first responders. I don't want to say we've dodged a bullet. We're not out of the woods yet, but early on, we know the impact that COVID-19 has had on a lot of first responders and a lot of communities, and you guys stepped up despite that uncertainty, and we're getting by it, getting through it. So thank you for you, to you and for your crews. But that's created some real financial uncertainty, of course. Do you have any input for the council as we move on later to talk about the public safety mill levy.
Mayor, Council, yes, I absolutely do. And I would, again, I would have to follow along with what Chief St. John said. We have, obviously, this is a COVID-19 was not an expected event. It has occurred. We do not know where the numbers will fall. We don't know the economic impact. I would be in complete agreement with Chief St. John that we have a level of service that we have to provide, and it is our intent that we would prefer not to slide back. We need to maintain what we have. Again, it might be a discussion for another day, depending when we get the numbers in and see what the impacts are to advance what we were trying to advance before. But it's certainly my opinion that at this point in time, we would just be very thankful to be able to maintain the level of service and personnel that we have now to service our community the best we can during this time.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Questions for Chief about the budget presentation. And Chief, here I'm going to ask you to minimize your screen. That'll help me to see the other council members when they raise their hands. Screening back, questions for Chief Rash. There we go. Thank you very much. Really? No questions. Chief, you did such a good job. You left them speechless.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm here, so thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. Definitely not a bad thing. I think your presentation was really well done. Everyone has done a great job tonight. I think the reality for all of us is just, settling in and having to adjust to coming up with ways to address the situation. I guess in regard to some of the information that you provided, and I guess a similar question that I asked Chief St. John is, what do you see is one of the real primary issues that you would like for City Council to focus on as we go into the public safety mill discussion after this presentation? Is there something that really becomes a priority to you that you want us to really focus on and address?
Mayor, Council, Councilman Ronnie, I guess I would have to say and reiterate what I'd mentioned before. To me, the priority after this discussion tonight would most certainly be, at minimum, to maintain the services that we have, the personnel, and our ability to provide the services that we can provide today. Obviously, there's a lot of things that many of us would like to be able to do going forward, and I'm hopeful at some point in time we're able to go forward. But at this point in time, I would be very thankful just to be able to have what we have, keep what we have, and maintain the level of service to our community that we can provide today. I hope that answered your question.
Sure, it did. Just so you know, I am one of those that favors moving forward with the public safety mill levy. So, don't hold back with me if I ask a question. But I'll take your word for it. If you say, nope, we just want to maintain what we have, I'll take your word for it. But if there's something you really want us to discuss it, I'm one that wants to go for a public safety mill levy. I'd be willing to champion that. But I'll take you for your word. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Chief Rash? Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. So I was trying to look at Andy's budget sheet whenever Chief Rash, when you were giving your report. And so your PowerPoint, is there any way that you could send us your PowerPoint? And also, just to follow up with what Penny said, I mean, if you had your druthers at this point, if we did move forward with the public safety mill levy, what would be your first and foremost ask?
Mayor, Council, Councilmember Purrington, I guess, yes, I most certainly can get this email to all of the council members, so you would have this to review. So I'll make a note on that to make sure that I get that email to you tomorrow, if that's soon enough. The other thing, I guess, in a perfect world, yes, of course, we would like to see what we initially proposed with the 2 fire stations. We would like to have the additional staffing, response times, and things that we've discussed several times during our public safety mill levies. Absolutely, that's what we feel we're trying to do. Our job is to do the best that we can do moving forward to make it not only status quo, but to move forward in what we're trying to do. In light of our financial situation with the city, and in addition, the COVID-19 experience that we are currently in the midst of, I just have to tell you from my heart that to maintain what we have today under the circumstances as we know them today is something that I think that we would want to have. That would have to be the priority, in my opinion. The other things would be nice if we can move forward on them, but this is something that we absolutely can't fall below what we have right now. I don't know if that was answered your question properly, but I have to consider, as we all do, what our limitations are, what we can or can't do, and how that looks, so that we can maintain what we have.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Chief Rash? Council or Chris Bukowski.
So it's not a question, obviously, and I never have as good a delivery as Chief St. John, but I did not sequester the 2 chiefs to not be involved in the next discussion. They will both be here and able to answer questions and a part of that dialogue. I'd also say, your staff overall, the recommendations that we have before you we have differences of opinion, but generally we vetted them out pretty well as a staff. But ultimately, you guys are the better gauge of what the community's appetite is for. So please don't misunderstand when we say we think, and I recommend that we wait till next year for the public safety levy. It's not because we don't want to increase the investments in towards our goal of reducing crime in our community and reducing response times. We just don't think there's going to be a public appetite for it at this point. But you guys make that call, not us. And so anyways, I think we'll leave it at that. We've got public safety dialogue coming up next. We've invested a tremendous amount of time and resources into strategizing how to make Billings a safer community and what it will take to make it a safer community. And like all of you, it is heartbreaking to put that off. But we are all interested in the long-term success. We are much more interested in what happens 3, 5, 10 years from now. Even if those of us who are in leadership today aren't in our positions, we believe that is what's going to be the best interest of this community versus what we wanted to get done very much 3 months ago. So
okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for Chief Rash before we move off this item and move on to public comment? Public comment, by the way, we're about to embark on. If you're a member of the public, that phone number is 237-6196. So be prepared to dial any moment. Any other questions or comments before we move to public comment on all of the item 1 items from council? Not seeing any, then we will open it up for public comment on items 1A through 1D. That was the budget presentation by Human Resources, Legal Department, Police Department, and Fire Department. If you would like to comment, call that phone number, 237-6196. You'll have 3 minutes. We'll just need you to tell us your name and address. You'll be put in a phone queue. Please call that number now if you want to be heard. There is a delay if you're watching Community 7 television, and we're ahead of the television, so you'll be confused if you don't turn off or at least silence your television. 237-6196. Our clerk, Denise Bowman, will signal if we get a phone call. I'm not seeing any. 237-6196. Denise, do we have any phone calls?
No, Mayor, we do not.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. I think we've given adequate time. We'll close the public comment period on item number 1 and proceed to item number 2, 2020 Public Safety Mill Levy presentation by our city administrator and also, I guess, just our city administrator. Chris.
Fantastic. Andy's going to help me out here. He's going to pull up the presentation. And let me see. There we go. I was just trying to pull up the budget message just as we're getting ready to tee this. As you may recall, when you look at the budget, what you saw tonight between police, fire, city attorney's office, represents at least 80%, 80+% of what is in the general fund, public safety fund. So there is where the lion's share of your property taxes are headed. So for the public safety levy discussion, Andy, if you go ahead and slide here, we really wanted to keep this very straightforward for tonight. Really the question here in slide 2, and maybe I don't think I have control. Andy, are you able to hear me? Did I lose Andy?
I am. Are you able to see the slide, or do you?
We are.
Okay.
Yep.
I got control, Chris.
Okay.
On track.
All right. Keep me in line. Let's go to the slide 2 there.
Aren't you there? Oh. All right, fine. We'll just go this way.
There you go.
All right.
It's not sharing the right screen. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, thanks. Basically, we want to keep this really simple. You know, the question is, do you want to proceed with a mill levy in 2020, regardless of the size of it? In the memo, in all the conversations we've been having, we need you to give us direction in that regard. If the answer is no, then we can, the conversation kind of ends here. We'll come back. I would say, as we pointed out numerous times, this is not an issue that's going to go away. The structural imbalance isn't going to go away unless we cut some $6 million in expenditures out of the general fund, public safety funds, and therefore we'll need to be back in front of you between 6 to 12 months from now to be gearing up for what would be a 2021 mill levy. I would suggest that would be earlier in the year rather than as late as it was going to be this year, but there's just so much to learn between now and then. Really, I think the next slides that we have really rely on that answer. No levy. The proposed budget has about a $3 million in general fund reserves that are being utilized to pay for operations expenses. I think the total capital investment in the general fund and public safety fund are right in the neighborhood of $300,000. So you can't cut capital and get there. You would absolutely have to go with individuals and wages, which make up the lion's share. Personnel costs are the overwhelming majority of the cost. Short-term solutions for FY21 is that general fund. It's got that $3 million deficit. The equivalent, if we were to make that up, would be about 15 mills and cost the median homeowner about $43 a year. If we were to fix the mill levy, so these are getting into the options. If you the alternative section of the memo, if you decided not to go with the public or not to wait until 2021, you had this previous slide, which is to fill in the $3 million gap with the proposed budget. That proposed budget includes the PD1, and we don't want to focus there tonight, but we anticipate there'll be questions and dialogue there. I wanted to really try to keep it to public safety. But just to be clear, that $3 million deficit assumes PD1 costs get moved over. This second alternative that was provided in the memo, wasn't a lot of background on it, was just the concept is there's been some talk over the past year about the fact that the 2004 voter approved public safety levy, at the time the law required or necessitated that the city stick with a dollar figure. So I don't want to over assume here. I don't know if that was a legal interpretation. I don't know if that was the law at that time for the state of Montana, but for whatever reason, what went to the voters was, can we have $8.2 million to invest in law enforcement, public safety services? At the time the voters said yes to that, they were approving what they would anticipate to be a 60 mil increase. Thankfully, one of the benefits of a growing city is with that cap dollar amount at 8.2 million, today it takes 40.17 mils to generate the money to cover that 8.2 million. So if we wanted to fix this issue relative to today, we know we can ask for a mill levy, of which that mill, if the city's property values grow, that helps to fight the inflationary costs that we experience annually. Then you could go out for a levy request just to deal with this $8.2 million cap. If so, I think there's really two ways you could look at it. You could say, we're gonna ask the voters to approve the equivalent of 8.2 million or 40.17 mils. We're gonna levy 40.17 mils or 40, let's just round it, 40 mils forever. Well, 40 mils next year, Lord willing, or maybe I should say 2 or 3 years from now as the economy picks back up, that 40 mils is gonna bring in more than 8.2 million as the economy grows. So it's going to help fight off the inflationary losses that we've experienced since 2004. Another approach B, would be to say, well, when the voters approved the 8.2 million, right in the ballot language there, they were approving up to 60 mils to be levied. If you went to the 60 mil point, that would turn into 12.2 million to have the same purchasing power that it had back in 2004. So though this is not designed to do so, you could put a rationale together that this fills the financial gap that exists, right? You pick up $4 million more. So between this and PD1 and Lean 6 investments, I think you've absolutely solved the budget structural imbalance, and now you've bought yourself time to figure out what are the needs in the upcoming years. Next slide.
Chris, this one here, I don't know if I told you, this is just the excerpt from the resolution that was passed. It's the ballot language that shows, we levy $8.2 million. It was approximately 60 mils was the anticipation at the time. That's all I just wanted to provide there.
Thanks, Andy. And
that concludes the slide.
That's it. So, before we get too bogged down in the options and the alternatives, I would advise that we answer that first question, because if the answer to the first question, proceeding with the mill levy in 2020, is no, then we don't need to spend hours tonight talking about the other alternatives. If it's yes, then I think we got to get into those alternative discussions. We also have the slides. If you wanted to go there, the slides can go back to our March 16th conversation, which was the full levy request that we were heading into before COVID-19, changed everything. Mayor, that's it. We're glad to answer questions for you. Both chiefs are available. Andy and I are available, or Kevin Ifland.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll open up to council. Of course, if you do have questions for staff, this is a great opportunity to ask them. But ultimately, we do need to wrestle with the ultimate question of go or no go on a public safety mill levy. Some of the options for a public safety mill levy, just to remind you, that have been thrown out is the call it the I don't want to call it the Cadillac version, but the original version, probably dollar amount for an average $211,000 home, somewhere between $200 and $300 per home. Bring that down dramatically, just enough to cover the current deficit, would still be close to $150 for that home. Thrown out tonight, retroactively try to change public safety 2 to have its old purchasing value at 60 mils, or just to try to impose that or convert public safety 2 into something that will continue to increase with time, but that doesn't generate any or a lot of short-term dollars, less than $1 million, I'm sure. So those are some of the options, but maybe we got some discussion or questions. Councilmember Neese, I'm seeing hand up, and Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. I think I would like to help answer the first question for Chris. So otherwise the options don't matter. I for one would like to see us move forward on the public safety mill levy. And so I would hope that you could take a straw poll to see how many council members would like to move forward. If we don't have enough, then we should just call it a night. Again, that's my opinion, and Mary, and I don't want to give. I guess I can make a motion of direction if that would be a better option to move.
And we may get to that point. Since you're the first comment, it makes me a little nervous just to proceed to an immediate vote. But we can do that. So you're just saying a public safety mill levy of some form without any.
Of some form or another, I think we should put some kind of public safety mill levy forward to the voters. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't want to discuss the options right now. We can talk about that. I think we need to find out from the council members if there's some appetite for moving forward.
Okay, well, chime in if you're so inclined. Let's not do a vote because there are subtleties you may want to add to your comments a little bit, but who would like to speak in favor of a public safety mill levy? Kendra, Councilmember Shaw, I saw your hand go up.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. Say it's a really great question, and yes, it seems easy on its face. For me, my comment would be where I'm sitting is that if we decide to move forward with the Cadillac plan or the plan we'd originally come up with, I can get on board with that and go out to the public and do it. I would not be supportive of a levy that's only going to fix the budget gap. I really strongly feel that we're going to go out to our citizens. They're going to see their taxes raised. They're going to feel like they didn't get anything for that. And it's going to be really difficult, I think, to then come back the next year and say, well, now we need the money to actually do the public safety stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at. I agree. I don't want to get into, the debating part of it until we decide, do we want to do it? But for me, really, what it looks like is critical to the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your concise comments. Councilmember Ronan.
Thank you. I've made, no secret that I am absolutely for a public safety mill levy, have been for quite a while. And I'm good going forward with discussion, either the Cadillac version, as it's been said, or some of the other options for tonight. As both chiefs stated, I don't want to go backward either. And I don't think that safety is going to improve by doing nothing. I think that the further this gets kicked down the road, the bigger the ask is going to have to be every single time. And I personally have no problem with If the ask is smaller this time, as long as the messaging, and I firmly believe that it has everything to do with the way we message going forward with the public safety mill levy, and the way we communicate. Our messaging has got to be on point.